The summer of 1989 began like any other in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Fields of wheat swayed in the warm breeze, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or copse of ancient oaks, a place where generations had lived and died, where surnames carved into century-old headstones matched those on mailboxes lining the single main road. By all accounts, it was ordinary, painfully so. No one expected Millbrook to make national headlines. No one imagined the town would become synonymous with one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. But on June 18, 1989, 7 cousins vanished without a trace. 7 young people, bound by blood, disappeared on the same night, leaving behind nothing but empty beds and a community paralyzed by fear and confusion. The search that followed would span decades, crossing state lines and consuming the careers of countless law enforcement officers. The case would grow cold, then colder still, until it seemed destined to fade into the obscure annals of forgotten tragedies. Then, 35 years later, an anonymous tip led FBI agents to an abandoned limestone quarry 5 miles outside of town. What they unearthed there wouldn't just reopen the investigation. It would fundamentally alter our understanding of what happened that summer night, when 7 cousins went for a drive and never came home. Millbrook in 1989 existed at the intersection of rural isolation and the fading echoes of American industry. The textile mill that had once been the town's economic heart had closed 6 years earlier, leaving behind a hulking brick shell and widespread unemployment. By the late 80s, the population had dwindled to just under 4,000 people. Those who remained clung to the remnants of what had once been a prosperous community. The churches, the schools, the Friday night football games at Millbrook High. The Harmon family was among Millbrook's oldest and most respected. 5 siblings, Robert, Thomas, Patricia, Eleanor, and James Harmon, had all raised their families within a 15-mile radius of their childhood home. The siblings remained close, gathering regularly for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Between them they had 12 children, but it was the 7 oldest cousins who formed an inseparable bond. Michael Harmon, 18, was Robert's eldest son. Tall and athletic with a quiet confidence, Michael had just graduated from Millbrook High School with a football scholarship to Penn State. His teammates described him as focused, disciplined, the kind of person who set goals and methodically achieved them. His bedroom, left untouched for decades after his disappearance, contained college brochures, weights, and a calendar meticulously counting down the days until he would leave for university. Thomas's daughter, Jennifer Harmon, 17, was artistic and introspective. Her sketchbooks, recovered from her bedroom, revealed a talented hand and a sensitive eye. In the summer of 1989, she had been preparing her portfolio for art school applications. Friends described her as kind but reserved, someone who observed more than she spoke. The last entry in her journal, dated June 17, 1989, mentioned plans to photograph the abandoned quarry at sunrise for the portfolio. The twins, Daniel and David Harmon, 16, belonged to Patricia and her husband John Taylor, known throughout Millbrook as the Taylor twins. They were identical in appearance, but opposite in personality. Daniel was outgoing and popular, a natural performer who played guitar in a local band. David was studious and methodical, fascinated by computers at a time when most households didn't own one. They were last seen arguing about music in the driveway of their home, a mundane moment that would later be scrutinized for any hint of what was to come. Eleanor's daughter, Catherine Harmon, 17, was valedictorian of her junior class and editor of the school newspaper. Ambitious and articulate, she had spent that spring interviewing for summer internships at newspapers in Pittsburgh. The last photograph taken of Catherine shows her laughing on the bleachers at Michael's graduation ceremony, unaware that within a week her face would be on missing person posters throughout the state. James's children, Peter and Lisa Harmon, 15 and 16 respectively, were the youngest of the 7. Peter was shy and bookish, known for carrying a paperback novel wherever he went. Lisa was a talented pianist who practiced 3 hours each day, In the weeks before their disappearance, both had been helping their father renovate the family's barn into a rehearsal space for Lisa's music.
7 cousins. 7 distinct lives, interconnected by blood and the shared experience of growing up in a town where everyone knew their name.
In the final known photograph of all 7 cousins together, taken on Memorial Day 1989, they sit on the banks of Millbrook Creek, squinting in the sunshine. Michael has his arm around Jennifer. The Taylor twins are play-fighting in the background. Catherine holds up a can of new Coke. Peter is reading, partially hidden behind Lisa, who smiles directly at the camera. 3 weeks later, they would vanish without a trace. Saturday, June 17, 1989, was marked by perfect weather, 75 degrees, clear skies, a gentle breeze from the west. The kind of early summer day that feels suspended in time, stretching out into a warm, star-filled evening. The 7 cousins had made plans to attend the Millbrook Summer Festival, an annual tradition featuring carnival rides, food vendors, and a fireworks display at the town park. According to multiple witnesses, all 7 arrived at the festival between 6 and 7 p.m. Security camera footage from the local bank, whose parking lot bordered the festival grounds, captured Michael's distinctive blue 1978 Ford Bronco pulling in at 6:42 p.m. 4 figures who appear to be Michael, Jennifer, Catherine, and Peter exit the vehicle. The Taylor twins' red Chevrolet Camaro arrives 3 minutes later, with what appears to be Daniel, David, and Lisa inside. From 7 p.m. until approximately 10:30 p.m., the cousins' movements were witnessed by dozens of festival attendees. They rode the Ferris wheel, played carnival games, and shared funnel cakes at a picnic table near the bandstand. Nothing about their behavior struck anyone as unusual. They were, by all accounts, simply 7 teenagers enjoying a summer evening. Diane Miller, then 16 and a classmate of Jennifer's, later told investigators they seemed normal, happy, even. Michael won a stuffed bear at the ring toss and gave it to Lisa. The twins were arguing about something, but that was nothing new. Catherine mentioned wanting to see the fireworks from the Quarry overlook instead of the park. Said it would be a better view. The limestone quarry, located 5 miles outside of town, had been abandoned in the early 70s. In the years since, it had become a popular hangout spot for local teenagers. The quarry's main feature was a deep pit filled with emerald green water, surrounded by steep limestone cliffs. A winding dirt road led to several overlooks with views of both the quarry and the valley below. Parents warned their children about the dangers of swimming in the quarry waters or venturing too close to the unstable edges of the pit, but these warnings were routinely ignored. The festival's fireworks display began at 10:45 p.m. and ended at 11:10 p.m. As the crowd dispersed, several witnesses reported seeing the 7 cousins walking toward the festival parking lot. Barbara Thompson, a neighbor of the Harmons, told police she saw them all getting into Michael's Bronco around 11:20 p.m. When questioned about the twins' Camaro, Thompson wasn't certain but thought Daniel had mentioned something about picking it up tomorrow. This was the last confirmed sighting of any of the 7 cousins. None of the cousins returned home that night. At first, their parents weren't immediately alarmed. It was summer, after all, and the older teenagers often stayed out late. The Harmon siblings assumed the cousins were at one another's houses, a miscommunication made easier in an era before cell phones and instant messaging. By Sunday morning, however, concern had set in. Phone calls between the 5 Harmon households revealed that none of the cousins had come home. Initial worry quickly escalated to panic. By noon, all 5 families had gathered at Robert Harmon's home, and by 1 p.m. they had reported all 7 teenagers missing to the Millbrook Police Department. Chief Howard Reynolds, who would later describe the case as the one that haunted me into retirement, immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. 7 teenagers from prominent local families, all disappearing on the same night, suggested something far more complex than typical teenage rebellion. The initial search focused on locations where teenagers were known to gather: the abandoned mill, the train tracks, the quarry. Michael's blue Bronco was discovered in the quarry parking area, locked and empty. The Taylor twins' Camaro remained in the festival parking lot, also locked with no signs of disturbance. Inside Michael's Bronco, investigators found nothing obviously amiss. The keys were missing. A Guns N' Roses cassette tape was in the player. A Polaroid camera lay on the passenger seat, but without any film. In the back, a blanket was neatly folded, alongside an empty cooler. The area around the quarry was searched extensively. Tire tracks matching Michael's Bronco led to the parking area, but no further. Multiple sets of footprints were found on the dirt path leading from the parking area to the main overlook. But summer storms in the preceding weeks meant the ground was a palimpsest of impressions, impossible to date with certainty. The water in the quarry pit was dark and deep, estimated at over 200 feet in some places. Local dive teams attempted to search the waters but were hampered by poor visibility and the sheer size of the area. After 3 days of dangerous diving conditions, the underwater search was temporarily suspended. As news of the disappearance spread, the case captured national attention. The faces of the 7 cousins appeared on television screens across America. The phrase, the Millbrook 7, was coined by a Philadelphia news anchor, and the name stuck, appearing in newspaper headlines and on special reports throughout the summer of 19. Theories proliferated. Was it a kidnapping? A group suicide pact? Had they run away together? Were drugs involved? Had they witnessed something they weren't supposed to see? In the absence of concrete evidence, speculation filled the void. By the end of June, the investigation had expanded dramatically. The FBI joined local authorities, setting up a command center in the Millbrook High School gymnasium. Agents conducted hundreds of interviews, focusing on anyone who had been at the festival that night or had interacted with any of the cousins in the days leading up to their disappearance. Several leads emerged, only to dissolve under scrutiny. A gas station attendant in Bedford, about 40 miles west of Millbrook, reported seeing a group of teenagers in a vehicle matching the description of Michael's Bronco around 1 a.m. on June 8. However, security camera footage from the station was inconclusive, showing only a blue vehicle passing on the highway too distant to identify. A trucker claimed to have picked up a hitchhiker, matching Daniel Taylor's description near the Ohio border on June 19, but later retracted his statement, admitting he had confused the dates. Jennifer Harmon's camera was found in her bedroom, but the photographs from the festival night were missing. Her mother recalled that Jennifer had taken a full roll of film that day, but had not had time to develop it. The most tantalizing lead came from William Cooper, then 78, who lived in an isolated farmhouse near the quarry. Cooper reported hearing a series of loud bangs, like backfiring or maybe gunshots, around midnight on the night of the disappearance. He also mentioned seeing headlights on the quarry road later than usual, though he couldn't be more specific about the time. Cooper's farmhouse was situated such that he could see part of the quarry road from his bedroom window, but the overlook itself was obscured by trees. Investigators found his testimony credible, but frustratingly vague. Cooper died in 1992, taking any further insights with him to the grave. Throughout July and August, the search continued. Volunteers combed the woods surrounding the quarry and the wider Millbrook area. Helicopter searches with thermal imaging equipment revealed nothing of significance. The quarry waters were fully searched once weather conditions improved, but no evidence was recovered. The cousins' rooms were examined for clues. Their personal effects diaries, letters, school assignments were analyzed for any hint of plans or troubles. Their friends were interviewed, then interviewed again. Their routines, relationships, and recent behaviors were scrutinized for anything unusual. What emerged was a picture of 7 ordinary teenagers, with ordinary concerns. Michael was excited about college, but nervous about leaving home. Jennifer was working on her art portfolio. The Taylor twins were saving up to buy recording equipment. Catherine had recently broken up with her boyfriend, but didn't seem particularly distraught. Peter had just finished reading The Catcher in the Rye and couldn't stop talking about it. Lisa had a piano recital scheduled for the following week. Nothing suggested they were planning to run away. Nothing indicated they were in danger. Nothing explained why 7 cousins would vanish on a warm June night, leaving their futures suspended in time. As summer turned to fall, the investigation began to lose momentum. The command center at the high school was dismantled. FBI agents were reassigned to other cases. The media spotlight shifted to newer tragedies. For the people of Millbrook, however, the mystery remained an open wound. The 5 Harmon siblings appeared on national television pleading for information. They established a reward fund that eventually grew to $100,000. They consulted psychics, private investigators, and missing persons experts. But as 1989 gave way to 1990, the case grew cold. In the absence of new evidence, the community began to fracture along lines of speculation. Some believed the cousins had run away together, perhaps to escape the limited horizons of Millbrook. Others were convinced there had been foul play, a kidnapping gone wrong, or a calculated act of violence. Still others embraced more outlandish theories involving government conspiracies or supernatural events. The Harmon families never gave up hope. Each year on June 18th, they held a candlelight vigil at the Millbrook town square. They maintained the cousins' bedrooms exactly as they had been left. They checked and rechecked hospital records and unidentified remains across the country. Investigators followed up on hundreds of reported sightings over the years, from Seattle to Miami, none of which proved substantive. The case file grew to thousands of pages, documenting dead ends and disappointed hopes. By the mid-1990s, the disappearance of the Millbrook 7 had become a footnote in the annals of unsolved mysteries, occasionally referenced in true crime books or television specials, but largely forgotten by the wider world. For the families and the town of Millbrook, though, time seemed frozen in the summer of 1989. Permanently suspended in the moment before certainty gave way to the unknown. The first break in the case came in 2012, 23 years after the disappearance. A construction crew excavating for a new housing development near the old quarry uncovered a Polaroid photograph buried about 2 feet below the surface. The image, degraded by time and the elements, showed what appeared to be the quarry overlook at night, illuminated by what might have been headlights or flashlights. The timestamp printed on the white border read, "Forensic analysis confirmed the photograph had indeed been taken with a Polaroid camera consistent with the model owned by Jennifer Harmon." While the image itself revealed little, just a blurry view of limestone rocks and shadows, the mere fact of its existence and location reignited interest in the case. Had one of the cousins taken the photograph that night? If so, why was it buried? And by whom? The discovery prompted a renewed search of the quarry area, using more advanced technology than had been available in 1989. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the surrounding terrain. New dive teams explored the quarry waters with better equipment. Nothing further was found, but the photograph served as a reminder that physical evidence might still exist, waiting to be discovered by accident or intention. Then, in early 2024, a seemingly unrelated event cast the case in a new light. Thomas Harmon, father of Jennifer, passed away from heart failure at the age of 80. While clearing out his home, his surviving children discovered a locked metal box in the attic containing newspaper clippings about the disappearance, copies of police reports, and private notes Thomas had made over the years. Among these materials was a handwritten letter, undated, in which Thomas detailed a conversation with Robert Harmon, who had died in 2018, about what Michael found at the quarry and why the FBI told us to stay quiet. The letter was fragmented and unclear, possibly written during a period of grief or illness, but it suggested the brothers had known something about the case that they never shared publicly. Thomas's daughter Angela, who had been 12 at the time of her sister's disappearance, brought the letter to the FBI. This new information, combined with advances in forensic technology and investigative techniques, led to the case being officially reopened in April. On May 3, 2024, the FBI received an anonymous tip through their online portal. The message was brief. The Millbrook 7, EU corner of the quarry. 30 feet down, look for the blue top. FBI agent Veronica Diaz, who had been assigned to the reopened case, immediately secured permission to excavate the specified location. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of a large object buried approximately 30 feet below the surface, near the northeast corner of the quarry. The excavation began on May 15, 2024, exactly 35 years after the disappearance. Media crews gathered at the perimeter of the police cordon. The remaining Harmon family members watched from a distance, bracing themselves for answers they had both sought and dreaded for 3.5 decades. For 3 days, heavy machinery carefully removed layers of earth and stone. On the morning of May 18th, workers uncovered a large object wrapped in the remnants of what had once been a blue top. As the material was carefully peeled away, a collective gasp went up from those close enough to see. It wasn't human remains, as many had expected. It was a vehicle crushed and corroded almost beyond recognition, but still identifiable as Michael Harmon's 1978 Ford Bronco. The same Bronco that had been found, empty and locked in the quarry parking area the day after the disappearance. The same Bronco that had been thoroughly examined by investigators before being returned to the Harmon family, who had kept it in storage for decades as both evidence and memorial. How could the vehicle be in 2 places at once? How had it come to be buried 30 feet underground? And most importantly, what did its discovery mean for the fate of the 7 cousins who had supposedly last been seen inside it? As forensic teams carefully excavated and examined the buried Bronco, they made another discovery. The vehicle's identification number didn't match Michael Harmon's Bronco. It was, in fact, registered to a man named Joseph Keller, who had reported it stolen from a Pittsburgh suburb in May 1989, a month before the cousins disappeared. Inside the crushed vehicle, investigators found fragments of fabric that would later be confirmed as matching the clothing Jennifer and Michael had been wearing the night they vanished. A partial fingerprint on the deteriorated rearview mirror was identified as belonging to Catherine Harmon. The discovery raised far more questions than it answered. Why would the cousins be in a stolen vehicle identical to Michael's, who had parked Michael's actual Bronco in the quarry parking lot? Was it all an elaborate misdirection, and if so, orchestrated by whom and for what purpose? As June 2024 approached, marking the 35th anniversary of the disappearance, the FBI announced they would be draining the quarry completely, a massive engineering undertaking that had been technologically unfeasible in the Harmon families, now primarily consisting of siblings and cousins of the missing 7, prepared themselves for the possibility of final answers. The town of Millbrook, which had never fully recovered from the shadow cast by the disappearance, held its collective breath. What lay at the bottom of the quarry? What secrets had been submerged for 35 years in those dark waters? And most crucially, would the truth finally be revealed about what happened to 7 cousins on a summer night in 1989, when they set out to watch fireworks and vanished from the face of the earth? The answers would prove more disturbing and more far-reaching than anyone could have imagined. The quarry had always been a wound in the landscape, a man-made chasm carved into the Pennsylvania hills, decades before anyone had heard of the Millbrook 7. But as the massive pumps roared to life on the morning of June 10, 2024, the quarry took on a new identity, grave, time capsule, and possibly at last the answer to a 35-year-old mystery. The operation to drain the quarry was unprecedented in scale for the small town. 10 industrial pumps worked continuously, day and night, their collective drone becoming the soundtrack of a community holding its breath. Engineers estimated it would take approximately 2 weeks to fully drain the 200-foot deep basin. FBI dive teams stood ready to investigate as the water level gradually receded, revealing layers of the quarry that had been submerged since before the cousins disappeared. Temporary floodlights illuminated the site around the clock, Local, national, and international media established a makeshift camp along the perimeter of the police cordon. The remaining Harmon family members took turns maintaining a vigil on a nearby hillside, watching silently as the murky green water was systematically displaced, flowing through massive pipes to a filtration system before being released into Millbrook Creek. 5 days into the operation, with the water level down approximately 50 feet, the first discovery was made. It wasn't what anyone expected, Agent Veronica Diaz would later recall in her official report. We were prepared for human remains. We were prepared for nothing at all. We weren't prepared for what actually emerged from the depths. As the floodlights caught the object breaking the surface of the receding water, there was momentary confusion. The metallic glint, geometric and incongruous against the organic shapes of rock and silt. As more of the object was revealed, its identity became clear. A safe, large, industrial, and unmistakably modern. Secured by chains to a concrete block, the safe had been deliberately sunk. It took a specialized team working with underwater cutting equipment to free it from its anchor and bring it to the surface. The safe bore no identifying markers or serial numbers, having been stripped of anything that might reveal its origin or ownership. Opening the safe proved challenging. Decades underwater had corroded the locking mechanism, requiring experts from the FBI's Technical Hazards Response Unit to carefully drill through the damaged components. When the door finally swung open on June 16, 2024, almost exactly 35 years to the day since the cousins vanished, its contents immediately complicated the investigation. Inside were 3 items: a VHS videotape in a sealed plastic bag, a Smith & Wesson .38 special revolver, and a small notebook, its pages protected by multiple layers of plastic wrap. The gun, when examined, was found to have been fired at least once. Ballistics would later confirm it matched bullet fragments recovered from the buried Bronco. The notebook contained what appeared to be financial records columns of numbers, dates, and cryptic notations written in a tight, precise hand. Forensic analysts would later identify the handwriting as belonging to Harold Weber, who had served as Millbrook's mayor from Weber had died in 2005. His connection to the case previously unknown, or perhaps deliberately obscured. The videotape presented a more immediate and visceral revelation. When agents played it on vintage equipment, the grainy footage showed the quarry overlook at night, illuminated only by headlights and what appeared to be flashlights. The timestamp in the corner read 11:58 p.m., June 7. The footage, lasting approximately 6 minutes, was shot from a hidden position in the trees. It showed 7 figures, presumably the cousins, gathered near the edge of the quarry. They appeared to be arguing, their gestures animated though no audio accompanied the video. A vehicle was partially visible in the background, its headlights providing most of the illumination. At the 5-minute mark, an 8th figure entered the frame, approaching from the direction of the parked vehicle. This person, tall, male, wearing what looked like a sheriff's uniform, spoke briefly to the group. Then, in a sequence that stunned investigators, he appeared to draw a weapon. The video abruptly cut to static at that moment, leaving the outcome unrecorded. The existence of this footage changes everything, Agent Diaz told her team during an emergency briefing. It suggests the cousins' disappearance wasn't an accident or a voluntary departure. It suggests they witnessed something or someone they weren't supposed to see. The identity of the 8th person in the video became the investigation's new focus. In 1989, Millbrook's sheriff had been Richard Gaines, who had led much of the original search for the missing teenagers. Gaines had retired in 1997 and died in 2012, never having been considered a suspect in the disappearance. However, Gaines wasn't the only law enforcement officer in Millbrook. The sheriff's department had employed 6 deputies in 1989, 5 of whom were still alive. FBI agents began the process of interviewing these former deputies, now elderly men in their 70s and 80s, while forensic experts attempted to enhance the video quality to better identify the uniformed figure. The draining of the quarry continued, revealing more of its secrets with each passing day. On June 19, 2024, with the water level down approximately 120 feet, dive teams discovered the remains of a vehicle submerged in what had once been the deepest part of the quarry. Unlike the buried Bronco, this vehicle had not been concealed with earth merely consigned to the depths and left for time and water to erase. It was a red 1985 Chevrolet Camaro, the same model and color as the car owned by the Taylor twins, which had been found locked and abandoned in the festival parking lot. Like the buried Bronco, this submerged Camaro had a different vehicle identification number than the twins' car. It too had been reported stolen from a shopping mall parking lot in Harrisburg, approximately 100 miles from Millbrook, in early June. Inside the waterlogged vehicle, divers recovered several items: a cassette player, a waterproof bag containing what appeared to be clothing, and most significantly, a Polaroid camera, matching the description of the one owned by Jennifer Harmon. The camera contained no film, but its presence in the stolen Camaro created a direct link to the cousins. As the quarry continued to reveal its secrets, the FBI expanded their investigation in multiple directions. Agents re-examined evidence from the original case file with fresh eyes and modern technology. They cross-referenced the financial records found in the safe with Millbrook's municipal records from the late 1980s. They interviewed surviving members of the 1989 Town Council, the police department, and anyone who might have had connections to Mayor Weber. A pattern began to emerge, faint at first, then with increasing clarity as more evidence accumulated. The financial records in the notebook documented a series of payments from an entity identified only as MVC to several individuals identified by initials. The largest payments went to someone designated as RG, potentially Richard Gaines, the former sheriff. On June 21, 2024, with the quarry nearly drained, the most significant discovery was made. At the very bottom of the quarry, partially embedded in decades of silt and debris, lay a large metal container, approximately 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. It resembled a shipping container but smaller, with a heavy door secured by an external padlock. The container had been weighed down with concrete blocks, similar to the one that had anchored the safe. "We knew immediately this was what we'd been looking for," Agent Diaz would later testify. Everything else, the safe, the cars, had been preparation for this moment. It took specialized equipment and a full day of careful work to extract the container from the quarry floor and transport it to stable ground. The padlock, like the safe, had corroded over time but remained intact. Rather than risk damaging potential evidence by forcing it open, technicians used a precision cutting tool to remove the entire locking mechanism. As the door swung open on the afternoon of June 22, 2024, the remaining Harmon family members gathered behind the police line fell to their knees. Some wept, others stared in silent disbelief. 35 years of uncertainty had come to an end, but the truth that replaced it offered little comfort. Inside the container were the remains of 6 individuals. 6, not 7. Initial forensic examination indicated the remains had been preserved in the airless, watertight container, protected from the elements and predators. Personal effects found with the body's jewelry, clothing fragments, a class ring from Millbrook High, suggested they were indeed the missing cousins. But one body was conspicuously absent. Michael Harmon, the oldest cousin, was not among the dead. As the forensic team processed the grim discovery, investigators turned their attention to the anomaly at the center of the case. If 6 of the cousins had been in the container at the bottom of the quarry, where was Michael? And perhaps more importantly, what role had he played in the events of that night? The answer, or at least part of it, came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Harmon, Catherine's mother and the only one of the original 5 Harmon siblings still living, had maintained her daughter's bedroom as a shrine for 35 years. When FBI agents interviewed her following the discovery of the remains, she revealed something she had kept hidden since night. There was a letter, she told Agent Diaz, her hands trembling as she unlocked a small jewelry box on her dresser. I found it the week after they disappeared, hidden inside Catherine's pillowcase. I didn't tell anyone, not the police, not my brothers and sister. I was afraid of what it meant. The letter, written in Catherine's neat handwriting and dated June 15, 1989, 2 days before the disappearance, was addressed to her mother. "Mom," it began, "if you are reading this, something has gone wrong. Michael says we will be fine, that he has a plan to keep us safe, but I'm not sure. He's been acting strange since he found those files in Mayor Weber's office when he was cleaning last month. He says there's something wrong in Millbrook, something big that involves Sheriff Gaines and maybe others. He won't tell us everything, just that we need to be ready to leave. He made copies of some documents and says we need to use them as leverage if things go bad. Jennifer took pictures of something at the old mill, I don't know what, she won't say, but she's scared. Michael says we might need to split up, that it's safer if we are not all together. He has a backup plan if anything happens to him. I love you, Mom. Please don't worry. Michael says we will be back once it's safe, once people know the truth. But if you are reading this, something went wrong. Look for the truth at the bottom of the quarry. Michael says that's where everything ends up in Millbrook eventually. The letter transformed the investigation. What had been perceived as a case of 7 victims now appeared to have layers of complexity involving a possible whistleblower, a cover-up, and a plan gone tragically wrong. FBI agents returned to the records found in the safe, this time focusing on what MVC might represent. Cross-referencing with Millbrook's historical documents, they discovered that Millbrook Valley Construction had been the primary contractor for several major municipal projects in the late 90s, including renovations to the town hall, expansion of the water treatment facility, and stabilization work at the quarry itself. The owner of MVC had been Victor Castle, a prominent businessman who had left Millbrook suddenly in early 1990, reportedly to pursue opportunities in Florida. Castle had died in 2008, but his widow still lived in Tampa. When interviewed by FBI agents, she revealed that their hasty departure from Millbrook had been motivated by fear, not opportunity. Victor came home late one night in June of '89, terrified like I'd never seen him, she recounted. He said there had been an accident at the quarry, that some kids had seen something they shouldn't have. He said Sheriff Gaines had handled it, but that we needed to leave town as soon as possible. We were in Florida by August. Victor never spoke about Millbrook again. The investigation now centered on what exactly Michael Harmon had discovered while working as a part-time cleaner at the town hall, and what Jennifer Harmon had photographed at the old mill. Both locations were searched thoroughly in July 2024, though decades of abandonment and decay had erased most potential evidence. However, in a forgotten filing cabinet in the basement of the town hall, agents discovered a sealed envelope hidden behind a drawer, marked only with the initials M. Inside was a single microfiche slide containing what appeared to be financial records and construction specifications for the water treatment plant expansion of. Experts who examined these documents identified numerous discrepancies between the official plans and what appeared to be the actual construction discrepancies that suggested corners had been cut, safety regulations ignored, and funds misappropriated. Most disturbingly, the records indicated that toxic waste from the old mill had been illegally disposed of during the construction, potentially contaminating Millbrook's water supply. This was the secret, Agent Diaz concluded. A corruption scandal involving the mayor, the sheriff, and the town's primary construction contractor. They were poisoning the town to save money, and Michael Harmon discovered the evidence. The theory explained much, but not everything. It didn't explain the elaborate staging with the identical stolen vehicles. It didn't explain the container at the bottom of the quarry, a containment method that seemed excessive even for a cover-up of multiple murders. And most crucially, it didn't explain the fate of Michael Harmon, whose remains were still unaccounted for. The forensic examination of the 6 bodies found in the container provided some answers, but raised even more questions. All 6 cousins had died from gunshot wounds, consistent with the revolver found in the safe. The ballistics matched. The bullets had been fired from close range, suggesting execution rather than a chaotic shootout. But the most disturbing detail emerged when the medical examiner determined the approximate time of death. According to the forensic evidence, the cousins in the container had died approximately 3 to 5 days after their disappearance, not on the night of June 17th, as had always been assumed. They had been alive somewhere for days after they vanished. As July 2024 progressed, the investigation took yet another unexpected turn. An anonymous package arrived at FBI headquarters, addressed to Agent Diaz. Inside was a VHS tape labeled only with the date 06/21/1989, 4 days after the cousins' disappearance. The package had been mailed from a post office in northern Michigan, with no return address. The tape contained footage of what appeared to be an abandoned hunting cabin. 6 of the cousins, all except Michael, were visible, sitting on the floor with their hands bound. A figure moved in and out of frame, face obscured by a ski mask. The cousins appeared frightened, but physically unharmed. A newspaper visible in one shot confirmed the date as June 20. At one point, the masked figure spoke directly to the camera. "This is what happens when you stick your nose where it doesn't belong, Michael. You have 24 hours to return everything you took, or you will never see your cousins again." The footage ended abruptly, leaving investigators with the chilling realization that they were watching a hostage video, a piece of evidence that had never been part of the original investigation. If the tape had been sent to Michael in 1989 as implied, he had never shared it with authorities. The question of who had preserved the tape for 35 years, only to send it anonymously in 2024, became yet another mystery within the larger puzzle. Forensic analysis of the package revealed no usable fingerprints or DNA. The postmark indicated it had been mailed on June 15, 2024, just as the Quarry draining operation was making headlines nationwide. Agent Diaz developed a theory. Michael Harmon didn't disappear with his cousins that night. He was being set up as the whistleblower, the one who had discovered the corruption. The others were taken as leverage to force him to surrender whatever evidence he had collected. When that failed, they were killed, and an elaborate cover-up was implemented to make it appear that all 7 had vanished together. This theory was supported by a new analysis of the videotape found in the safe. Enhanced footage revealed that the 8th person who approached the group at the Quarry Overlook was not wearing a sheriff's uniform as initially thought, but rather a jacket with patches that resembled a uniform in the poor lighting conditions. Furthermore, this figure appeared to be speaking primarily to one person, likely Michael, rather than addressing the group as a whole. The investigation now focused on identifying this 8th person and determining Michael Harmon's whereabouts after June 17, 1989. Had he fled? Had he been pursuing his own investigation into his cousin's abduction? Or had he met a fate different from, but no less final than theirs? On July 18, 2024, another anonymous tip came through the FBI portal. Check property records for Harold Weber after 1989. Hunting cabin, northern Michigan, 464844. The coordinates led to a remote area near Marquette, Michigan. Records confirmed that former Mayor Weber had indeed purchased 20 acres of woodland there in October 1989. 4 months after the cousins' disappearance, the property had changed hands several times since Weber's death in 2005, but satellite imagery showed a small cabin still standing in a clearing. FBI agents, working with Michigan State Police, executed a search warrant on the property on July 23, 2024. The cabin, now dilapidated and abandoned, matched the interior seen in the hostage video. In what had once been a bedroom, underneath rotting floorboards, investigators discovered a plastic container holding a Millbrook High School yearbook from 1989, a set of car keys matching Michael's Bronco, and a micro-cassette recorder. The recorder contained a tape with a single brief recording, dated June 22, 1989, according to the speaker's introduction. The voice, identified by family members as belonging to Michael Harmon, was clear despite the passage of time. "This is Michael Harmon. It's June 22nd, 1989. If you are listening to this, I'm probably dead. Sheriff Gaines, Mayor Weber, and Victor Castle have been dumping toxic waste from the old mill into the water supply. I found the documents. Jennifer photographed the dumping site. They have taken my cousins to force me to hand everything over. I made copies of everything and hid them where they will never find them. I'm going to the exchange tonight. I don't expect to survive, but I'm going to make sure they don't either. I have rigged the quarry overlook. When they show up for the exchange, I will trigger the charges. The evidence is in a waterproof container at the base of the old oak behind my father's shed. The combination is my birthday backwards. Make them pay for what they did to Millbrook. Make them pay for what they did to my family." The recording ended with the sound of a car door closing. FBI agents immediately secured the property behind Robert Harmon's former home. The oak tree Michael had mentioned still stood, though it had been struck by lightning years earlier, and was now little more than a massive, charred trunk. At its base, agents discovered a metal box buried approximately 3 feet deep. Inside the box was a comprehensive collection of evidence, original documents detailing the toxic waste dumping, photographs taken by Jennifer showing barrels being emptied into the water treatment facility's intake pipes, and a detailed letter from Michael explaining how he had discovered the conspiracy while cleaning Mayor Weber's office. The final piece of the puzzle was a hand-drawn map of the quarry, with an area circled and labeled explosives. Michael had apparently planned to trigger a controlled explosion during the exchange mentioned in his recording, presumably intending to kill himself along with those who had kidnapped his cousins. But historical records showed no explosion at the quarry in June 1989. Whatever Michael had planned had either failed or never been implemented. As July 2024 drew to a close, the FBI presented their findings to the surviving Harmon family members in a private briefing. The narrative they constructed from the available evidence was tragic, but at least offered the closure the family had sought for 35 years. Michael Harmon had accidentally discovered evidence of environmental crimes being committed by Millbrook's leadership. He and his cousins had been at the quarry on the night of June 17, 1989, possibly to collect more evidence or to confront those involved. Someone likely associated with the conspiracy had approached them. In the confrontation that followed, the other 6 cousins had been abducted and held hostage to force Michael to surrender his evidence. When Michael failed to comply within the deadline, 6 of the cousins were executed, their bodies placed in a container and sunk to the bottom of the quarry. Based on Michael's recording, he had planned some form of retaliation involving explosives at the quarry, but something had gone wrong. What happened to Michael Harmon after he made that final recording remained the one piece of the puzzle still missing, until August 3, 2024, when a 73-year-old man walked into the FBI field office in Pittsburgh and introduced himself to the receptionist. "My name is Michael Harmon," he said quietly. "I understand you have been looking for me." The man, who claimed to be Michael Harmon, sat in interview room B at the FBI field office in Pittsburgh, his weathered hands folded on the table before him. He was thin, almost gaunt, with deep lines etched into a face that had spent decades looking over his shoulder. His hair, once the rich brown seen in his high school graduation photo, had long since turned a steely gray. But his eyes, those were unmistakable. They matched exactly the eyes that had stared out from missing person posters for 35. Agent Veronica Diaz studied him from behind the two-way mirror before entering the room. She had spent months immersed in the case of the Millbrook 7, had memorized every detail of Michael Harmon's life up to the moment of his disappearance. The man waiting on the other side of that door was simultaneously a ghost, a victim, a potential suspect, and quite possibly the only person alive who knew the complete truth about what had happened in June. When she finally entered the room, Diaz placed a single photograph on the table, the last known image of all 7 cousins together, taken on Memorial Day 1989. The man reached for it with trembling fingers, tracing the outlines of 6 faces that had been reduced to bones at the bottom of a quarry. "I have carried this same picture with me for 35 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Different copy, same creases." He reached into his jacket and produced a worn, faded version of the identical photograph, its edges soft from decades of handling. DNA tests would later confirm what Diaz already knew from that simple gesture. Michael Harmon had returned from the dead. "I should have come back sooner," he began, his voice cracking with emotion. "But by the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. They were gone, and as long as those responsible were still in power, my testimony alone wouldn't have been enough. I needed proof that would stand up in court. I needed evidence that couldn't be buried again." Over the next 16 hours, with minimal breaks and a rotating team of agents documenting every word, Michael Harmon provided his account of what had happened in Millbrook during that fateful summer of 1989 and the 35 years of self-imposed exile that followed. The truth, as it often does, proved both simpler and more complex than the theories that had been constructed around it. Michael Harmon's job as a part-time cleaner at Millbrook Town Hall had been unremarkable until May 28, 1989, when he accidentally knocked over a stack of files while dusting Mayor Weber's office after hours. As he gathered the scattered papers, a single phrase caught his eye: "Toxic disposal costs eliminated." Curious, he read further, discovering communications between Mayor Weber, Sheriff Gaines, and Victor Castle of Millbrook Valley Construction detailing a scheme to dispose of hazardous waste from the abandoned textile mill directly into the town's water supply. The mill, which had closed in 1983, had left behind hundreds of barrels of industrial chemicals too expensive to dispose of properly. Rather than pay for legal disposal when renovating the water treatment facility in 1988, the conspirators had simply incorporated the toxic waste into the system, slowly poisoning the town to save money. "I didn't know what to do," Michael explained to Agent Diaz. "I was 18, about to leave for college, but I knew people were getting sick. The cancer rates in Millbrook were way above the national average. My own grandmother had died the year before from a rare form of lymphoma. I couldn't just ignore it." Michael made photocopies of the documents and shared his discovery with his cousin Jennifer, who was known for her interest in photography and environmental issues. Together, they formulated a plan to gather more evidence before going public. Jennifer began photographing the water treatment facility, documenting the continued dumping of chemicals from remaining barrels at the mill. By mid-June, they had involved the other cousins in their amateur investigation. Catherine, with her journalistic ambitions, helped organize their findings. The Taylor twins used their computer skills to analyze public health records, correlating disease clusters with water system maps. Peter researched similar environmental cases, while Lisa, whose piano teacher had recently been diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder, compiled accounts from Millbrook residents experiencing unexplained health issues. "We were naive," Michael admitted. "We thought once we had enough evidence, we could take it to the state authorities, or maybe a newspaper in Pittsburgh. We didn't understand what we were up against, how far they would go to protect themselves." On June 17, 1989, the night of the Millbrook Summer Festival, the cousins had arranged to meet at the Quarry overlook. After the fireworks, the location offered privacy and, crucially, a view of the water treatment facility in the valley below. Michael had discovered that another shipment of waste barrels from the mill was scheduled to be processed that night, and Jennifer wanted to photograph it from the elevated vantage point of the quarry. What they didn't know was that they were already under surveillance. Sheriff Gaines, alerted by a deputy who had noticed Jennifer taking photographs near the water facility earlier that week, had been monitoring the cousins' movements. When all seven left the festival together in Michael's Bronco, Gaines followed at a distance. At the quarry overlook, as the cousins set up Jennifer's camera equipment and discussed their plans, Gaines confronted them. He was not in uniform. This was not an official visit, but he was armed and increasingly agitated as he realized the extent of what the teenagers had uncovered. He tried to play it cool at first, Michael recounted. Said we were trespassing, that the quarry wasn't safe at night. But when he saw Jennifer's photographs spread out on the hood of my Bronco, something changed in his expression. He knew we had him. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but would echo across decades. As Gaines reached for his weapon, Michael lunged toward him. In the ensuing struggle, the gun discharged. The bullet grazed Michael's side but struck Jennifer in the shoulder. As she fell, the other cousins scattered in panic. Gaines, now frantic, fired several more shots into the darkness. In the chaos, Michael, bleeding but mobile, managed to reach his Bronco. Believing the others would flee into the surrounding woods, he drove away to draw Gaines's attention, intending to return once he'd lost his pursuer. I thought they'd run, Michael said, his voice hollow with the weight of a 35-year-old miscalculation. I thought they'd hide until I could come back for them. I didn't know Gaines had brought backup. That backup, as the investigation would later confirm, included Mayor Weber and Victor Castle, who had arrived at the quarry in a vehicle nearly identical to Michael's Bronco, one of two stolen specifically for that night, as part of a contingency plan should their operation be discovered. While Michael led Gaines on a high-speed pursuit through the back roads of Millbrook County, the other cousins were captured by Weber and Castle. They were forced into the stolen Bronco and taken to the hunting cabin in northern Michigan property that Weber had been preparing as a bolt hole should the environmental crimes ever come to light. Michael, having eventually lost Gaines, returned to the quarry hours later to find it deserted. Assuming his cousins had fled separately, he drove to his father's home to retrieve the evidence he had collected, intending to go directly to the state police. But when he arrived, he found Sheriff Gaines waiting in the darkness of the family living room, his father bound and gagged on the couch. Gaines told me they had the others, Michael explained, his hands clenched into fists at the memory. Said if I ever wanted to see them alive again, I had to surrender everything I had on the water treatment facility and leave town immediately. He gave me 48 hours to comply. In a move that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Michael agreed. He handed over the documents in his possession, though not all of his evidence, some of which was still hidden behind his father's shed. Gaines released his father, who had been told the cousins were being held as a consequence of Michael's illegal snooping into town business. Dad believed him, Michael said bitterly. Why wouldn't he? Gaines was the sheriff. Weber was the mayor. These were men he'd known his entire life, men he trusted. The idea that they were capable of what they'd actually done, it was inconceivable. Michael's father, convinced that compliance was the only way to secure the cousins' release, insisted that Michael leave town as instructed. Reluctantly, Michael drove to Pittsburgh, where he checked into a motel under a false name to wait out the 48-hour deadline, expecting that once Gaines verified the documents had been surrendered, the cousins would be released. He was wrong. I saw it on the news 2 days later, Michael said, his voice breaking. 7 cousins missing from Millbrook. My face alongside theirs. They were never going to let any of us go. The whole thing. The 48 hours, the documents, it was just to get me out of town, to establish the narrative that all 7 of us had vanished together. Realizing he had been set up as part of the cover story, Michael was faced with an impossible choice. Return to Millbrook and likely join his cousins in whatever fate awaited them, or remain in hiding and try to find a way to expose the truth and save them. He chose the latter, a decision that would define the rest of his life. Over the next several days, Michael, still using a false identity, monitored news reports about the disappearance while attempting to gather resources for what he now understood would be a protracted fight against powerful adversaries. He sold his watch and class ring for cash, purchased a used car from a private seller who didn't ask for identification, and began making plans to rescue his cousins. Through a collect call to a friend in Pittsburgh, placed from a payphone to avoid being traced, Michael learned that Sheriff Gaines was leading the search for the missing teenagers, with the FBI now involved. The irony was unbearable. The very man responsible for their disappearance was now in charge of finding them. On June 21st, 1989, 4 days after the initial disappearance, Michael received a videotape at the motel where he was staying. Delivered by an unknown courier who left it with the front desk, the tape contained footage of his 6 cousins being held at the hunting cabin. It destroyed me, Michael recalled, tears finally breaking through his composed facade. Seeing them like that, knowing it was because of me, because of what I'd discovered. The message was clear. Come back with everything, or they die. But I knew by then that even if I complied, none of us would survive. Gaines and the others had gone too far to ever let us go. Michael formulated a desperate plan. He returned to Millbrook under cover of darkness on June 22nd, recovered his hidden evidence from behind his father's shed, and prepared to confront his cousin's captors. His plan involved rigging explosives assembled from materials he purchased across 3 different counties to avoid detection at the Quarry, overlook where he proposed to make the exchange. I wasn't thinking clearly, he admitted. I was sleep-deprived, wounded, terrified for my cousins. I convinced myself I could force Gaines to reveal where they were being held, then trigger the explosives once they were safe. It was a fantasy, the kind of thing you believe when you have got nothing left to lose. Michael arranged the exchange through another anonymous phone call, demanding that Sheriff Gaines meet him alone at the Quarry at midnight on June 20th. But when he arrived to set up his improvised explosives, he discovered something that shattered his remaining hope. Fresh tire tracks leading to the edge of the Quarry, an area that had been recently disturbed, and most damning of all, Jennifer's camera strap floating on the surface of the water. I knew then, he said, his voice barely audible. I knew they were gone. Something had happened. Maybe they'd tried to escape. Maybe Gaines and the others had decided they were too much of a liability. Whatever it was, I was too late. In that moment of devastating clarity, Michael abandoned his plan for confrontation and revenge. Instead, he gathered his evidence, recorded the microcassette testimony that would be found 35 years later, and made the decision to disappear. I couldn't bring them back, he explained, but I could make sure they didn't die for nothing. I could preserve the evidence until a time when it could actually make a difference. For the next 35 years, Michael Harmon lived as a ghost, initially using the identity of a deceased classmate from a neighboring town. He established himself in northern Michigan, working odd jobs that paid in cash and required minimal documentation. He moved frequently, never staying in one place long enough to form connections that might lead to questions about his past. As the years passed and technology evolved, maintaining his anonymous existence became increasingly challenging. He avoided cameras, social media, and situations that required background checks. He watched from a distance as the case of the Millbrook 7 faded from national consciousness, preserved only in the memories of those directly affected and the occasional true crime retrospective. I followed the case however I could. Michael told Agent Diaz, library microfiche, internet cafes, true crime books. I knew the FBI had given up actively investigating by the mid-90s. I knew my parents never stopped searching. That destroyed me. Not being able to tell them I was alive, but as long as Gaines and Weber were free, as long as they had power in Millbrook, coming forward would have been suicide. Michael had established a system of monitoring key events in Millbrook through newspaper subscriptions and, later, online news alerts. He tracked the careers and eventual deaths of the conspirators. Victor Castle's apparent heart attack in 2008, Mayor Weber's passing in 2000. I thought about coming forward after Gaines died, Michael admitted. But what proof did I have? My word against decades of established narrative. The evidence I'd preserved was circumstantial at best, without bodies or a crime scene. I needed something definitive that would force a proper investigation. That catalyst finally came in 2024, when news of Thomas Harmon's death and the discovery of his private notes reached Michael through an online news alert. When the FBI reopened the case based on the letter found in Thomas's possessions, Michael recognized his opportunity. Using anonymous email accounts and public computers, He began feeding information to investigators, the tip about the buried Bronco, the coordinates of the Michigan cabin, the suggestion to check Weber's property records. I had to be careful, he explained. If I revealed too much too quickly, it would be obvious the information was coming from someone directly involved. But I needed to guide the investigation toward the truth. When the FBI announced plans to drain the quarry, Michael knew the final pieces of the puzzle would soon emerge. The discovery of the container and his cousin's remains confirmed what he had suspected since that night at the quarry. Their deaths and the elaborate cover-up that followed had been the desperate actions of men protecting not just their freedom but their reputations and legacies. I waited until I was certain the evidence was strong enough, Michael said of his decision to finally come forward. The container, the safe, the videotape. My recording all of it together tells a story that can't be dismissed or buried again. It was finally safe to be Michael Harmon again. The DNA confirmation of Michael's identity sent shockwaves through both the investigation and what remained of the Harmon family. Eleanor Harmon, now 82 and the last surviving sibling of the original 5, collapsed upon receiving the news that her nephew was alive. When she recovered, her first words were a question that had no simple answer. Where have you been while we grieved for you? The reunion between Michael and his aunt took place under FBI supervision at Eleanor's home in Millbrook on August 10, 2024. The conversation, recorded as part of the ongoing investigation, oscillated between tearful embraces and recriminations, between understanding and anger. You could have told us, Eleanor said, gripping Michael's hands with surprising strength. We buried empty coffins. We mourned 7 children, not 6. If I had come back, there would have been 7 bodies in that quarry, Michael responded. Everything I did staying away, staying silent, was to survive long enough to make sure they paid for what they did. As Michael's testimony and the physical evidence were assembled into a comprehensive case, the full extent of the conspiracy began to emerge. Records subpoenaed from healthcare facilities across Pennsylvania confirmed what Michael had suspected in 1989. Millbrook's cancer rates had been significantly higher than state and national averages throughout the 1990s, with particular clusters along the main water lines from the treatment facility. Environmental testing of the quarry water and soil samples from throughout Millbrook revealed traces of industrial chemicals consistent with textile manufacturing waste, evidence of contamination that had persisted for decades, despite natural degradation. The most damning evidence came from the financial records found in the safe, which documented not just the environmental crimes but the subsequent cover-up. Payments to Sheriff Gaines and several deputies had continued for years after the cousins' disappearance, suggesting an ongoing conspiracy of silence that extended well beyond the immediate events of June. On September 15, 2024, the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania announced charges against 4 surviving individuals implicated in the conspiracy. 2 former deputies who had assisted in the cover-up, the former town treasurer who had helped conceal the financial transactions, and Victor Castle's son, who had taken over his father's business and continued the payments even after the elder Castle's death. For the people of Millbrook, the revelations were cataclysmic. The town's population, already diminished to barely 2,000 residents, faced not just the horror of learning what had happened to 6 of their children, but the realization that their most trusted officials had potentially poisoned them for years. Class action lawsuits against the town and the estates of the deceased conspirators were filed within days of the U.S. Attorney's announcement. In October 2024, a formal memorial service was held for the 6 confirmed victims: Jennifer Harmon, Daniel and David Taylor, Catherine Harmon, and Peter and Lisa Harmon. Their remains, finally released by the FBI after extensive forensic examination, were buried in a shared plot in the Millbrook Cemetery, beneath a monument depicting 6 trees with intertwined roots. Michael Harmon, both survivor and witness, stood at the periphery of the gathering, still uncomfortable with the attention his return had generated. He had given his testimony, had fulfilled his decades-long mission to expose the truth. But the question of how to live in a world where he was once again Michael Harmon remained unanswered. In the final days of October 2024, as the criminal proceedings against the surviving conspirators moved forward, Michael Harmon returned to the Quarry one last time, accompanied by Agent Diaz. The massive pit, now completely drained and surrounded by evidence markers, bore little resemblance to the water-filled chasm that had featured in his nightmares for 35. "I keep thinking about that night," he said, standing at the edge of the overlook where it had all begun. "If I had made different choices, if I had gone to the state police immediately, if I had insisted we all stay together when Gaines confronted us, maybe they'd still be alive." "You were 18 years old," Diaz reminded him. "You were up against a conspiracy involving the most powerful people in town. The choices you made kept you alive long enough to bring them to justice." "Justice," Michael repeated, testing the word as if unsure of its meaning. 6 graves, 4 indictments, and a dying town. Is that justice? He knelt and placed 6 white roses at the edge of the overlook, each representing one of his cousins. They had been teenagers with dreams and plans, their lives stretching before them like the valley beyond the Quarry, vast with possibility. In an instant, those possibilities had been extinguished by men who valued money and reputation above human life. As Michael rose to his feet, the setting sun cast long shadows across the Quarry, transforming it momentarily into something almost beautiful, a testament to the irrepressible way nature reclaims spaces abandoned by humanity. In the valley below, the lights of Millbrook began to twinkle on, fewer with each passing year but persistent nonetheless. "What will you do now?" Diaz asked as they turned to leave. Michael considered the question for a long moment. For 35 years, his existence had been defined by absence, by what and who he wasn't. The prospect of a future as himself, as Michael Harmon, was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But for the first time since 1989, it's actually my choice." In November 2024, as the first snows dusted the hills surrounding Millbrook, workers began dismantling the water treatment facility at the center of the conspiracy. The structure, condemned after testing confirmed lingering contamination, was to be replaced with a modern system funded by federal environmental remediation grants. During the demolition, workers discovered something unexpected behind a false wall in the facility's main control room. A metal box containing dozens of Polaroid photographs. The images, preserved despite the passage of time, showed barrels being emptied into the water system, meetings between Mel Weber, Sheriff Gaines, and Victor Castle, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be the execution of the 6 cousins at the edge of the Quarry. Forensic analysis confirmed the photographs had been taken with Jennifer Harmon's camera, the same one later found in the submerged Camaro. The final image in the sequence showed all 6 cousins lying motionless on the ground, with a partial view of someone's hand holding what appeared to be Sheriff Gaines's revolver. The photographs provided the final, irrefutable evidence of what had transpired on that summer night in 1989. They confirmed the narrative Michael had constructed from fragments of memory and intuition during his decades in exile. They proved that his cousins had died because they had discovered the truth, and because those in power had decided their silence was worth more than their lives. In December 2024, exactly 35 years and 6 months after the Millbrook 7 disappeared, the case was officially closed. The 6 victims had been laid to rest. The perpetrators had been identified, with the living brought to justice and the dead condemned by history. The town of Millbrook had begun the long process of reconciliation with its poisoned past, and Michael Harmon, the 7th cousin, the only survivor, had embarked on the journey of reclaiming his name, his history, and his place in a world that had continued turning without him for 3. Some in Millbrook whispered that he should have stayed away, that his return had brought only pain and the collapse of comfortable illusions. Others viewed him as a hero who had sacrificed decades of his life to ensure the truth would eventually emerge. Michael himself rejected both narratives, understanding that the reality was both simpler and more complex than either version allowed. I was just a kid who found something he wasn't supposed to find, he told Eleanor during one of their increasingly frequent visits. Everything after that was just survival and stubbornness. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let my cousins be forgotten. In the spring of 2025, as the new water treatment facility neared completion, a small garden was planted beside Millbrook Creek, not far from where the Memorial Day photograph of the 7 cousins had been taken in. 7 trees, one for each cousin, were arranged in a circle, their branches reaching toward each other as they grew. At the center of the circle, a simple stone marker bore no names, just a date, June 17, 1989, and an inscription that captured both the tragedy of what had occurred and the resilience that had eventually brought the truth to light. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Some voices insist on being heard. Even from the depths, truth finds its way to the surface. The Millbrook 7 were no longer missing. 6 had been found and properly mourned. 1 had returned, carrying the weight of both survivor and witness. Their story, a testament to the power of corruption and the even greater power of persistence, had finally been told in full. And in a town that had been defined for 35 years by absence and mystery, the process of healing could finally begin.